Apologies received from Councillor Brooks and Councillor Crick.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ashley. Of course, the Resources Committee are in the position of having to scrutinise some of their own small scheme donations. So I'll just remind you of the situation. I think all of the members here actually have small scheme donations that are being reported. So normally that would be a prejudicial interest, but you have a standing dispensation from the Ethics and Standards Committee. So we still have to record that. So if you would all just indicate you agree that that's the declaration of interest you all need to make here. Thank you. I'm not aware that there would be any other personal interest queries.
And that is because of the early departures. I've already written it in the book. The early departures as chair of Greater Gwent Pension Fund. That has some of the decisions has an impact on that fund, etc. And I'm also on the Shadow Advisory Board representing the whole of Wales for that as well. I would rather declare an interest.
Fine, Councillor Barnett. So that will go down as a personal interest in the book, as you've indicated. Thank you, Chair.
Put that on, shall I? Minutes of previous meeting, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 7, and page 8. Everybody okay with that? Any points to raise? Do you want to go back again and have a look at points? Would somebody like to move that, please, before I go back and have a look? A mover?
I'll move it.
Thanks, you. Seconder? Yeah. Thank you. All right. Want to have a look back through, or think they're acceptable? If I think Phil's indicated anything. You want anybody? Any points? Have a quick look through. But back through the pages. Page 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Obviously, nothing. And number 8. No items burning. Anybody at the moment? There. Good. Thank you. Agenda item number 5 on page 9. Action sheet. Do you want to have a...
Thank you, Chair. Nothing to add other than, as it states there in the action sheet, I emailed out the responses to the procurement recommendations on the 6th of May. I haven't as yet received any feedback, so if you do want to provide anything, drop me an email. Okay.
Any comments on that one? Oh, thank you. Main part of the business, agenda item number 6, management of early departures. We're in your hands to start with.
First of all, we've got Martin Stiles from GMB coming along. Unison were also invited, but due to personal circumstances, Cheryl Morgan is unable to attend on this occasion. So if we invite Martin in first of all, and then Graham Russell will be coming to go through the main report and each of the recommendations set out in the action plan.
Okay. Thank you very much. And usual thing, any declarations of interest as we go along, we record. Yeah. Thank you.
If you need any advice, please call me down.
Thank you there. welcome Martin Stiles from GMB. You would like to sort of just introduce a bit of what you're about, and then we can go into this.
Good afternoon all. My name is Martin Stiles. I'm the branch secretary for Torvine, GMB. Okay.
We've got some questions here which we can lead on, which I think are helpful. Would councillors like to start there? I'm just going to leave this very open at the moment. Who would like to go? Yes.
Mary Bowner. My question is, recommendation 1B states consultation with the trade unions is a normal part of the process. Can you please provide a brief summary of the involvement in this process? Are there any areas where you think this process could be improved? Because we would welcome your views on that, obviously. So just to recap, a brief summary of that consultation at the moment and any areas where you think it could be improved.
We're all the way through any sort of redundancies or voluntary redundancies procedure. The first protocol is we have a meeting with the chief executive or the chief officer. They'd outline what the cuts are and the implications of how many sort of staff is got to entail. And basically we just take it from there really, and our involvement is to make sure that, to scrutinise the chief officers to make sure they carry up the correct procedure and everybody's just dealt fairly really.
Do you think there is scope for improvement?
I've got to be honest that the system that Torvine actually uses is one of the better systems. It's not a rigid system, and you know, with the profiling and the other options as early retirement, job share, all them other factors that some other councils don't actually use. So instead of, when it comes to reducing the staff or to meet the budget needs, there's other things that we look at, you know, like I said, redeployment, job share, early retirement. And the only one thing I'd add on the early retirement is that I think we need to work a lot more on the early retirement.
Right. Yeah, particularly perhaps implications for pension,
Yeah,
and that kind of thing. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, Karen.
Yeah, I was listening carefully to what you said, and it strikes me that the authority approaches you. They say they've got to make £100,000 worth of budget cuts in a certain area, which means that 8 staff have to go. But do they involve you at all in what happens after those people are gone? In the sense that, do they come forward with a plan to say, well, look, 8 people have got to go, but obviously that's 8 people's work. That work's got to go somewhere. Other people have got to pick up. Do you have any involvement in the discussions of how that work's going to be picked up and what the council are going to do to assist the workers who are remaining to manage that workload?
Yes, once the staff identified, say, left the authority, and while that due process is taking place, we we look at how the staff has left is going to have to manage the workload. We're fortunate in Torvine that we've got a very good HR department, I'm glad to say, and they work closely with the managers, the chief officers, to make sure that the staff has left there can manage their work accordingly. But it comes on to my other point where I said about perhaps job sharing or early retirement. Because if you've got to make one saving, so one post got to go, instead of making a one person redundant, well, perhaps 2 people could do a early retirement and you still retain the skills of the 2 people, but still meeting the needs of the budget.
What, you mean they come back part-time?
Yeah, but they activate their pension, and then perhaps they come into work and say 2 days a week each. So retaining the skills, spreading the workload about, so it's managed better, but also you meet the needs of the budget as well. So I think that's an avenue, especially moving forward, like when we do the troll for voluntary redundancies, it's going to get less and less because the staff is less and less, so...
Because as a follow-up to that, obviously, I mean, your members in particular are always affected for good or not so good or whatever by the handover services to different bodies. We had it when housing went to Bronavon, for example, when leisure services went to the Leisure Trust. What sort of consultation takes place then with you as your, the representatives or individual members on whether it is in their best interest to retire, take redundancy, or act under 2P and transfer over? Is a lot of support given in those circumstances?
Yeah, when you take the leisure services, it was made into a trust. We worked with the management. We worked with the members, the staff, to reassure them, about the 2P agreements. When the people, if they had to make staff cuts as they was going over into the trust, well, we was all working together to say, well, instead of saying, look, there's 8 staff got to go, well, let's look at it in a different way. And lucky enough, the senior management in the trust, in the Leisure Trust, agreed. And instead of having 8 staff, either compulsory redundant or voluntary redundant, we was using job share, using a profile system, and flexi retirement, so we can meet the needs of the service in the leisure, for example, and without actually losing 8 people. And we still met the financial targets.
Question 2 that I've got on there. Could somebody else answer that? Ask that question, please.
Afternoon, Martin. Will the unions be involved with the development of common principles, and what will this involvement entail? It's in recommendation 2.
Is you referring to, like, if the councils merge, and what sort of, because at the moment in Torvine, from the union point of view, we haven't got a set procedure to follow for, like, redundancy, voluntary redundancy, compulsory. We work with the management on a individual case, so it comes up case by case. But if the local authorities, if the Welsh Assembly decide that the council's got to merge, but because every council have got different processes that they use, I think it'll have to come that you're going to have one process to fit all, because you can't have, so if the councils do merge together, I think from a trade union point of view, we're going to have to all be singing from the same hymn sheet. You can't have one system for one council, one for the other, because we're going to come together as one then, aren't we?
I think what you're saying here, on the recommendation 2 is working with local government, the Welsh Government should seek agreement on some common principles. That's obviously across the board. Any other questions?
I would have concerns if that was only in the hands of regional officers, because I think you need input from local representatives like yourself as well, from the merging authorities.
I was just going to add is that from the union point of view, we have Torvine branch meetings, and we also have branch meetings with our neighbour branches as well, like in Newport, Cardiff. So we've got a network that we can feed and we can bring to the table as well. So.
Any more comments from members? Right, next question on here. Somebody else like to lead on that, please? Go on.
Paragraph 5.51 of the report states that Torvine has no general scheme whereby people can simply request voluntary exit. Do you think there should be a general scheme?
Like I referred to earlier, I don't think we should have a general scheme, because it works well for Torvine, because when cuts to the budget in individual departments got to be made. I think it's got to be looked at that department. You can't have one system fit all. You've got to actually look to meet the aims of the budgets in a department. You've got to look which is best, whether take a voluntary redundancy, job share, flexi retirement. Do you need to retain some of these skills? Can the department let the skills go? If we have flexi retirement, you know, you can reduce the budget. If you had 2 staff take flexi retirement, you could still meet the needs of the budget and retain them skills. So I think, answer to your question is that, no, I don't think we need one system, really.
Any more comments on that, members? Thank you for that. That's right. Next question. Can we have somebody else for that one? Okay. Yeah.
As a union, have you found that there has been an increase in the number of complaints, communications relating to increased stress, workloads on remaining staff as a result of the number of early departures?
Well, to answer your question, yes, really. I think there's no getting away from it. If you've got 10 staff working in a department and they've been reduced down to 5 and the workload is still there, this is where I think, once again, I think we've got a good HR department, and we're fortunate we've got a lot of good managers in Torvine, and it's all about, from a trade union point of view, working together, and people, you know, and our members and staff speaking up. If you're struggling and you're getting stressed, well, speak to somebody, speak to the union, speak to your manager, speak to HR, we'll manage it. You know, so we are promoting that if any member of staff is struggling, well, to come forward and speak, and we regularly have union meetings, and it's the same with Unison, with Cheryl. If anybody wants to speak to Cheryl, they can. The door's always open, and it's the same with the management, you know. So, and we've had good feedback on it. You know, people are actually coming forward and saying, "Oh, how do I manage this? Am I going to get in trouble because I haven't done this on time?" And we say, speak to your line manager. You know, that's what they're made for. They're made to manage your workload and support you. And I think in Torvine that we are managing it very well, I think.
I was going to ask you a question there, because, I mean, one of the concerns we had yesterday when we did the pre was about the skills that people have. Obviously, they're very valuable to the council and to colleagues. Do you know, you mentioned stress there. We've discussed that in other meetings you and I have been in as well. And the point about skill sets across the council, and some people having to manage, because people are gone, manage more than one skill. Does the union have a view on that?
Yeah, going back to the flexi retirement, you know, and when you have the flexi retirement, you can, like I say, you can hit your targets on the budgets and still retain the skills. But what we are trying to develop now with the senior management at Torvine is a flexibility. Trying to work together on a flexibility with the workforce across departments. If you've got a department that's struggling and you've got another department with the skills, and perhaps even though it's different departments, well, it makes sense for that person or them staff to come over there, if it's only for a week or two, to help out, to relieve the workload, and then go back. So we're trying to look for a policy or a way working forward how staff can cross boundaries, because we've got to get away from, this is my department, that's your department. We've got to sort of utilise the skills now of everybody in the Torvine, really.
You.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Martin, for the feedback on that. Just you mentioned that the use of the profiling scheme there's been quite a bit of take-up on that. I mean, we as a committee, some time ago, probably a year or so ago, when we knew that we were going to have to make, as a borough, cuts in staffing due to budgetary constraints. We looked into a number of different scenarios, and we arranged video conference calls with other borough councils who had successfully, managed a reduction in staff numbers, and looked at the ways that they'd done it, and the profiling scheme was the one initiative that seemed to work very well. So we, back then we made the recommendation that we should go with that, and I think from what you were saying, it has been significant in terms of us being able to have a database of staff, as you said, with the available skills, maybe not necessarily working in one department, but as a result of this, they've got the opportunity to utilise their skills and transfer into a different area. So, I'm glad that that's helped out really with staff retention, and obviously we were looking to try and fill vacancies with internal candidates before looking, externally. So I'm glad to hear that's been quite successful, really. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
On one point that you made on the profiling, we've got a little bit of work to do on the education side of it. We're bringing that on board now. Working with senior officers and the employee services, we are trying to bring education, the non-teaching staff, bring that on board, because we're finding that there's vacancies in schools that perhaps should be in profiling. Like you just said, that we should look to, if we've got a person with a skill match that's going to perhaps potentially be made redundant, well, if there's, for the profiling, there might be a place in the education department. But at the moment, that's not happening, so we're mindful of that. We are working with the Chief Officer of Employee Services, and we're working on that at the ERCC meeting. So.
I must say that I expect Glyn is as well, because when we used to sit on the PSJCC, there was a recognition that teachers apart, that the staff in schools, there should be a two-way flow with redundancies. It could be a redundancy in the school, and a typist in unison, or one of your, caretakers could be used in central establishments, and vice versa. And that was the agreement then.
Well, there's, like you said, it is a two-way flow. It could be somebody in the education system, like a caretaker or whatever role, classroom assistant, that got skills that we could retain in Torvine. I wouldn't go as far as say it's not working, but I go as far as to say that it needs a bit of tweaking.
Is that due to the different structures in the education world?
Yeah, I think it is. Because, as you know, the schools manage their own budgets, and so it's just a matter of bringing it all together and bringing them on board, really, and explaining the profiling system, and that it got the benefit for the schools and it got the benefit for the council. So it's 99%, they say, and it's just that 1% now we need to bring on board, and hopefully it'll come on soon now.
Phil?
For workers with stress-related problems, do you have access to the Occupational Health Department?
All staff, not just union members, but all staff have got access to the occupational health. There's a stress line that Torvine provides, which I know it's confidential, but we've had feedback that it's been very successful, and there's been a slight increase on people phoning the stress line, which is good, because if you're stressed, it's better to talk to somebody. So.
Thank you for that. Right, last question. Do you want to go with that, Hugh?
Are there any comments you would like to make with regards to the current arrangements in place within the Council and the areas identified for development for the Council with regards to the management of early departures as detailed in the action plan?
Only one comment that I would like to make on that really is you've heard me say today now a lot about flexi retirement, and I think that's going to have to be a big way forward as we go through the next couple of financial years with austerity measures. We've got to find a way forward of trying to reduce budgets and keep skills. So I think that is the way forward on that really, is because as we we ask for voluntary redundancies. I think it's going to get less and less. The staff's getting less and less. We can't keep, as an authority, letting go the more skilled people just because they're at a certain age. Because if you go, when you're over 55, you can access your private pension. So we've got to try and balance it out somehow, but we can't keep losing our more senior workers and skilled staff. So we've got to find a way forward, really. And I think by managing it, we're going to have to either start pushing the flex retirement or the job sharing. You know, so hopefully I answered your question. All right.
Comments back, members? So what you're suggesting is that some people, when they get 55, aren't going. That seems to be a view in the report as well, doesn't it? They're not, and so we're retaining some older people because we need that level of skill until they get to retirement age. Is that what you're suggesting there?
Yes, right. But instead of losing that skill, if we could perhaps find a way forward with these individuals, the staff of flexi retirement, well then we can reduce the budget, but also retain their skills as well. So if any staff wants to retire and call it a day, if they've done 30, 40 years service and they think, well, that's enough, or perhaps because of their age they can't cope anymore, you know, with working 5 days a week full time, well, let's put it out there to them and say, well, how about flexi retirement? How would you like to work 2 days a week?
What's your members' views on that when you ask them that question?
The members' response is, I'd say it's about 80%. There's a lot of staff over 55 that would like to do this flexi retirement. So there needs to be a lot more work with the managers and with senior managers and supervisors and managing their department, because just because it might make it easier for a manager to turn somebody down for flexi retirement, that is not always the best policy, you know. So I think we're going to have to look at this flexi retirement. And
can I add there? It's a caveat to that. I mean, it is that. Oh, thanks. That the change from the final salary pension allocation aids that, doesn't it? It used to be that people wanted to hang on to their position because it would have such a direct bearing on their pension entitlements, but that career average helps that situation, doesn't it? Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any workers on 0-hour contracts within Torvine?
I'm glad to say that in Torvine, as far as I'm aware, looking from neighbourhood services, we got none, no zero contracted hours in neighbourhood services I know of. Even when we have like seasonal workers come in, they are on a 37-hour contract.
The other thing I was going to ask you, if somebody retires at 55, they conceivably get themselves another career, couldn't they, after that? So are people taking early retirement because they want to do something else, or they not retire because you're getting a lot of people setting up businesses and things? What's happening there? Do you know?
I don't know. Some of our members have said, you know, like if they've done like 30-odd years service, and perhaps some of them have thought, well, if I take early retirement,
yeah.
Like you just said, I got the funds here now, I could start my own business. Yeah. Or what I find a lot of people, they got grandchildren, they want to help their families out. Various reasons, really, like, you know.
We're mindful of the fact that obviously one of the things we looked at, that this is one of the biggest employers in the borough. We're also social capital in here, and it's quite important that what we're looking at, that was the other side of this. I'm quite interested to hear what you say on that. Lynn?
Yeah, just a quick, because I've been very interested to hear what you've been saying on flexible retirement and coming back and job sharing. This seems to be an issue with you because you've mentioned it several times today. Is this because you feel that Torvine are going, okay, we want we want a redundancy here, we're going to let you go, but we're not going to let you go because we need to keep somebody. That's what you think one of the problems seems to be.
But instead of saying, you got to stay and you can go, well, if you had two staff that could say, we both want flexi retirement, but you can retain the two of them, meet the budget needs of the department, and still keep the two staff skills. You know, so...
I've had a number of complaints about people who wanted to go and not being able to go, and yet seeing a colleague approximately the same age with approximately the same experience being allowed to go. And of course, they don't take it well.
Have they asked their manager about flexi retirement? You know, like you say, hopefully this committee will be hearing a lot more of this flexi retirement as we move forward now. And, you know, unfortunately, we're going to have more cuts in the next couple of years. So I think that might most probably be the next model forward, how to meet our targets and try and retain some of our skills. You know.
Pardon me asking again, that's the scheme we're running at the moment, is it?
It is one of the schemes that's on offer, is job share and flexi retirement. But from a union point of view, we feel that the flexi retirement should be used more and explained more to the management of the benefits it can bring to the staff and to the department and to the council.
Right, anyone? You?
Yeah, thanks, Martin, for that. I wanted to ask a question. A resident in my ward contacted me recently over concerns that they had over staffing levels within trading standards within Torvine. Now, I know it's perhaps slightly different because we had the sad death of the head of that department. He died young and while still in post. But there have, for reasons, I don't know whether it's people retiring or part of the cutbacks or what have you. But I had a letter back from the chief exec advising me that we were doing, in effect, a collaboration with a neighbouring authority for us to be able to continue delivering the statutory levels of service within trading standards. I wondered if you had any sort of commentary around that and on how you felt that was working. Whether perhaps you felt we might see more of that going forwards. I mean, ultimately, that decision might be imposed upon us by the minister if we're forced into mergers. But have you got any comments around that, Martin?
Well, from a trade union point of view, I think it's a good way going forward. Because I know senior staff within the refuse recycling. I've been working and liaising with Blaenau Gwent for 8-9 years, and I think that's got to be the way forward. As like I said about balancing departments, if the trading standards in Torvine is under stressed, overworked, and the work level perhaps is more manageable in Blaenau Gwent, well, what's the problem with bringing one officer over to help out if it's only for a couple of weeks? You know, we've got to start collaborating more and with the staff as well. Because you might have some departments that have seasonal workloads, might be more in the summer than in the winter. So when their workload perhaps reduces a bit, well, if the staff have got the skills, why can't they be spread out and help in other departments, you know, perhaps with a bit of retraining, you know, because as they say, a one-trick pony now doesn't fit anything. So even in my line of work, everybody got to be multi-skilled, multi-flexible. Got to be able to, you know, drive lorries, do whatever, you know. So from, like, you go back 20 years ago when I was on the council, and you had people that was a driver and somebody that was a non-driver. And that driver only drove lorries. And if his lorry went on the road, he'd stand there all day doing nothing. So you can see how far we've come in the last 20, 25 years, that, you know, everybody got to be flexible, really.
Thank you for that answer, Martin. With that in mind, do you feel that what's the word I'm looking for? That the resources are in place within Torvine to be able to provide that additional training and cross-training for your members?
Well, I should. I should imagine that the funding has decreased over the years. But if the money's not there for training, why can't we start working like with our neighbours in Blaenau Gwent? If you have an officer for 2 days working over in Torfaen, and we lend an officer for them for 2 days, well, why should there be budget and monies crossing hands? You know, let's all start working together. You know what I mean?
And this is actually fairly linked to what's just been said. We have a duty of care to our employees, and I'm speaking as an ex-union rep, but not in local government now. We're in very fraught times, and they're likely to get worse, not only with local government reorganisation, but general sort of austere times coming. Do you think that we have given you the adequate facility arrangements, you and your counterparts in the other unions, to deal with this kind of plethora of questions and requests for advice or representation or whatever it might be? Because we don't, with all respect, I mean, we do pride ourselves on being an authority where we work well with the trade unions, and I would hate to think that you might be dropping like 9 pins with stress-related illnesses.
Well, I'm glad you answered that question, because facility time, we could always do with more facility time. What we've got to be mindful of is that I actually work for Torfaen. I've got a job, I'm employed by Torfaen, so I got to, you know, sometimes it's stressful for the union reps that, you know, we've got to represent the members. We've got to try and attend meetings with senior management, meetings like today, and also mindful that I've got a day-to-day job as well. So, and I wouldn't go as far as to say the fear factor, but we find it's getting harder and harder to recruit union reps. You know, sometimes you've got to put yourself out there. If you disagree with a management's decision, you've got to challenge her in the correct manner. And you know, sometimes it is a tough job. But I'd like to thank you for the question, and we could do some more facility, please.
Right. Thank you. Any more burning questions? I pull us back to the. We've gone slightly out, but I think that about employment, it's actually pertinent to early departures, because you're going from a job to, and it's quite a drastic thing to contemplate retirement or going somewhere else, which is what this is all about. Have you got anything you'd like to add in conclusion for what has been a very full reply? Thank you very much indeed.
Well, I'd just like to thank everybody for inviting me to the meeting today, and just to say that that going forward with Torfaen, I'm glad to say that we have got a very, very good working relationship with senior management, the chief officer, and head of HR. And so long may you continue, and thank you again.
Thank you. They're there, and certainly when we read through yesterday, they went there, didn't they, Mary, as far as we looked. So if you want to go with it, we go with it. Okay? When you're looking at...
Well, to be honest, the only thing that... It's not actually to do with this report in the sense that we have noticed within the authority that we have lost a number of positions, not so much through this issue of early retirement or redundancy, but they've just gone. And obviously, that in some ways saves the authority money when they don't replace, but it also causes issues within the department. such as Hugh mentioned there within trading standards. So I think, to be honest, perhaps we, you know, I'm looking for some guidance. Should we stick rigidly to what we're doing here, or should we move
I
around
think if
a
you
bit
ask
in that
questions on recommendation 1, which is the business case, you might actually bring that out, because we did talk about that yesterday. At any rate, if I get Graham to introduce himself, I'm sure he doesn't really need an introduction, as he wrote this thing anyway. And if you'd like to introduce the report briefly, we then can come in on our recommendation on this.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think I know everybody, so I don't think I need to introduce myself. What's important here is that, at least what's important for me, is that I think it's helpful and constructive that periodically bodies such as the Audit Commission will look across the board and try and put into context the sort of information that comes through in this kind of process. We know what we have done over the past several years, but to be able to put it into a broader context, I think, is quite helpful. Having said that, and this is outlined in the report, that in completing the report and then submitting it, the Audit Commission could really only come out with generic comments about the broader principles. So it is in no way a detailed or forensic examination of our practices and how we operate in this particular year. It is nevertheless quite illuminating to put our results into the context of the local government family, but also to put it into a wider context with other public sector bodies. And I have no doubt you'll have picked up on some of those strands already. For me, it was quite important to explain the local context for Torvine in terms of some of the practices that we currently operate, particularly in the sense of we don't have any open-ended ability for staff to simply say, I want to go and be made redundant. Please give me a lump sum to walk away from the organisation. We don't do that. What we do, and what you will be very familiar with, is that we run this in parallel with the budget compilation process. So as part of Chief Officer mitigations coming forward, if they have to look at staffing, then we will have done a trawl to see who is interested in voluntary redundancy. And we've tried wherever possible to use voluntary redundancy rather than compulsory redundancy. Having said that, it isn't always possible. And so what comes through in here is that there are numbers of compulsories that have gone. I think the figures start to show a changing scenario, and we might get into that in the sense of it's not been, to use a term, famine or feast. It's been fairly controlled throughout the last 3-4 years or so. But what is very noticeable is that the numbers expressing interest in voluntary redundancy as a means of early departure is reducing, and reducing quite quickly. And with the financial prospects we have coming forward, then the likelihood is that compulsory redundancy may become a bigger issue that we have to face up to as a council. So linked into that, what we ensure is that when we apply this process, it's consistently applied, and there is a policy of the council that I can outline in more detail that governs that. We also look at redeployment opportunities, and we use the profile scheme where we can to redeploy people, and we also operate a system of flexible retirement. Within the report, I've included some comparators, but also tried to set out some context there, whereby I think one of the most important things for me is that, to draw the conclusion that have we used early departures as a mechanism to help us? Well, quite clearly we have done. to quite a large extent. But it's been across a whole range of approaches in terms of some compulsory, some voluntary, and some of the others I would question whether they're really early departures, but under the definitions Wales Audit Office were using, we did need to bring them in. I think the payback periods look reasonable in that what we're actually saying there is where the payback period is less than 12 months, it means that if you pay somebody to go, it will self-fund within the same financial year. And I think that's quite important on an ongoing basis as part of the budget processes that Chief Officers put together. I've included a little bit more colour there in terms of ages of departures, because I think that does open up some interesting lines of questions which you may want to delve into, and there's some interesting dynamics there in terms of compulsories versus voluntaries and the different ages for those sorts of groups. And then there is always particular focus when you look at this area in terms of, have people left with settlement agreements? Have they been paid additional amounts of money over and above any statutory entitlement? And if so, why? And so there is reference to that in there. Although I would like to think that out of 474 instances that the numbers we are showing here are very modest in the context of that overall total. There's then the action plan, and I suspect you don't want me to go through that at this stage, but more than happy to do so. But I think for us, this report has been a particularly useful checkpoint or reference point to say, what is it we're doing, how are we doing, how do we compare to others, but equally, are there still issues that we can learn and that we should be bringing forward for action? And the action plan attempts to bring some of those things forward, subject to your views and considerations. So I'll pause there by way of introduction, Chair, if that's okay.
We got things based on your recommendations, which is a general theme, which we can latch onto. I've also picked up on what you said there about settlement agreements, because we did discuss that yesterday, and ages and action plans. Were people okay with that? So have a look at recommendation 1 on there. There's probably a couple of questions in there. Who wants to go first with the first general bit of that? Are you happy with that as an approach? Lynn's looking pensive here. Would you like to have a go again? Somebody like to have a go, first of all? Hugh?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, hi, Graham.
Go on, this is Graham.
Basically, so one of the areas identified was with regards to flexible retirement for those over the age of 55. What work has been undertaken to assess the impact of the skills gap that would be left when that person retires? And can you comment about the use of consultants or other staff brought in to cover temporary contracts or whatever in terms of managing that process? Thank you, Graham.
Flexible retirement is something that was brought in under pension regulations to try and avoid what was colloquially called a cliff edge from employment to retirement. It's helpful in the sense of providing you get it right, somebody can gradually migrate from full-time employment to a retirement situation, and it's not so much of a cultural shock for them in their personal life. However, it isn't without cost. So that the whole principle about this is that a person can retire, have access to their pension benefit, but continue to work. So there is an ongoing cost to the employer, and there is a cost to the pension fund at the same time. So what we have, and what the I suppose not best practice, but any organisation in our position would do, is to ensure there is an appropriate business case for a flexible retirement. There is no automatic right for staff to have flexible retirement, but once they're age 55, they can apply. And in order to help, each application needs to be supported by a report to the Chief Officer which sets out the business case. And the business case will be around service delivery and the requirements of the job, and it will be around the costs associated with that. So it may be, for example, we have a scheme which says if you are applying for flexible retirement, you must reduce your grade by 2 grades or reduce your working week by 20%. So if you are a full-time worker on a grade 8, it can be either or a reduction to grade 6 or from 5 days to 4 days. Now that creates a saving for the council, inevitably by definition. But the question in a service sense is, can whoever it is, resources, neighbourhoods, whoever, can they live with that reduced amount of resource and still do the job that they have to do? So can they afford to just contract that bit of the service, or at least continue what they need to do at that lower level of resource? The saving they then make would pay for any additional cost that might be necessary. For example, somebody over the age of 55, there might be a slight pension strain cost to them going early. We might reduce the pension a little bit to reflect the fact it's going earlier, and the pension pot has to be spread over more years. And those sorts of savings can pay for those sorts of things. But it is this balance in terms of, does the business case stack up? If the department says, well, we can afford to lose this person, but we've got to cover the gap over here because we've lost some skills, then there is an issue there about cost. And reference was made to perhaps looking at consultancy cover. But I would suggest that if consultancy cover was required, the business case doesn't stack up in the first instance. That has to be part of the service element of the evaluation. So it's service and costs, and generally flexible retirement shouldn't be granted where there is a cost to the council, unless there's a very, very short payback period, say for example less than 12 months, and thereafter there is an ongoing saving. So I would be particularly disappointed if what we were seeing was people being given flexible retirement only to be replaced by a consultant coming in because the process hasn't been followed properly.
Yeah, much was made by the trade union representative about this flexible retirement option. Obviously, it's a much favoured option amongst the trade union members at the moment. And much was made, of course, of then the loss of the skills gap, the loss of skill in allowing a large number of older workers to retire early. Is there a scheme? I mean, you've obviously outlined the fact that there is a flexible retirement option, but have you actually looked at this idea of retirement and job sharing, so you allow 2 people to go and then come back and do like 5 days between them, so that you lose the effective cost of 1 post, but you bring back 2 people?
Before you answer that, can I also add the other thing which strikes me immediately about this? Obviously, if there's other monies available, the other thing comes in is, have you got trainees and the various... I know we're not recruiting, but the obvious thing is whether you've got trainees, apprenticeships and all the rest of it in at the other end as well. You must be reskilling, and with those experienced people still around, it does make sense to look at that side of it as well.
Pass the skills on.
But both these questions open up a far wider debate, really, which is about workforce planning and organisational development. It also opens up a wider perspective in terms of, for early retirements, people will only get their pension benefit once they reach the age of 55. So if we make them voluntarily or compulsory redundancy or the flexible retirement, by definition, they will be in excess of 55. What that means is there's a high likelihood that you are losing an officer with perhaps 30 years plus experience. You look at the statistics over recent years, and I would have to say, in my personal view, it's quite concerning, the amount of experience that has walked out of the door for very legitimate reasons. But that creates a little bit of a time bomb for the future that needs to be addressed. Because if we are losing significant numbers of people at that higher end of the experience spectrum, we need to replace that at the lower end in some way through apprentices, trainees and those sorts of schemes. And we've started something on a fairly modest basis with Torvine training within the past year to try and bring some of those people in with external and grant funding, because we are not really recruiting significant numbers of people. We simply don't have the financial wherewithal to do that now. So we do have an issue, and I guess that's part of the reason why you're seeing more collaboration across councils, because they are losing pockets of experience in different ways. And for example, we will find we've got experience in one area and Monmouthshire haven't, or Newport have in one area and we haven't. And there is a little bit of trade-off and goodwill and exchange of functions in terms of helping other councils where we can. And I think it is partly because of this financial pressure and financial squeeze. Moving on to the issue about allowing flexible retirement and also or almost building it into a job share type arrangement, then that's eminently sensible. If we can get... I come back to my earlier answer, really, that if we've got people in the same area who are doing similar types of role and they both want flexible retirement, and we can merge the composite of their remaining roles together, then it can be a job share. But you need the ideal combination of circumstances. So they both need to be working in the same area, they both need to have the complementary skills to be able to do the complete job, and the service manager needs to be able to say, I can lose a post. So it's perfectly feasible. I cannot recall us having one instance of that yet, and I think it's simply about not the fact that people aren't perhaps thinking about it, but we haven't had a circumstance where two people have come forward in the same service area. The irony here is that it's possible for individuals who are of an age that they could adopt flexible retirement, they could come back to work part-time, and with their part-time work and their pension, they'll get more than they actually had when they were working full-time with us. So they may work 3 or 4 days a week, and because they get the pension as well, they're getting more. But those are people who we know will have worked 30, 35 years in the public sector. There perhaps isn't any pension strain cost because they've got all of their service in. And in those instances, whilst the pension fund are now paying for sort of surplus the costs and that, we are retaining the experience, which is helpful.
Bill?
Afternoon, Graham. With those people you just said, could retire, come back, take their pensions, would there be any extra tax implications on their pensions, other than what they normally pay?
No, they simply pay tax on a higher amount of money. They, rather than say, 20,000 in a full-time job, they might have 10,000 as a pension and 15,000 as a salary in a revised role. So they'd simply pay tax on the 25,000 rather than the 20,000. So they pay tax on it, but their annual earnings have gone up, and that's what they're paying the tax on.
Thank you there. Should we have the other bit of this recommendation? Can somebody ask some questions on that, please?
Okay. There's an issue here on impact assessment forms. Have these now been implemented, and if so, how are they working?
We've used that for the first time this year for this particular trawl of requesting voluntary redundancy expressions of interest. And the reason we've introduced it, and I make no apology for this, it's originated through HR and through the health and safety side of HR. That's where we've developed it from, recognising the potential impact onto teams where 2 or 3 people in a team of 6, 8 or 10 have gone. There's more pressure on the people who are left. And we wanted to try and enforce a discipline with chief officers, with team leaders, in terms of, have you thought about the impact onto your colleagues who are still here doing the job? Can you really allow these people to go? We know it has been done in certain areas, but I would have to say that we only finished the process and letters were sent out to staff in the middle of April in terms of those who could go on voluntary redundancy and those who couldn't. And that, was following on the setting of the budget and final consultation with the trade unions. So what I have not done since those letters have gone out, I have not gone back and taken the temperature with chief officers to say, did you complete all these? How was it for you? Did it influence your thinking and your decision making in terms of working through that? I haven't done that yet, but that is something that needs to be done. I think it's particularly important that we are seen to be not only facilitating those people who wish to go and we need them to go, but it's important to see that we are supporting those people who are remaining in employment with the council.
But briefly on that, not really a question, but a comment. I mean, I was in Schools Monitoring Subcommittee yesterday, and we had a complaint along those lines. We'd allowed someone to go, and now it was felt from within the schools they were not getting the service that they had been, and they were having concerns over it. So I think it is important that you look at those forms.
If I may, just a brief comment on that. It's right to say that the level of HR support to education, we did lose a very senior, experienced member of staff. And that's something that I'm in active discussion with at the moment with the Assistant Chief Executive, Head of Education, in order to put in additional resource within the schools area, recognising that the requirements are there to justify additional resource. So that's actively being pursued at the moment.
Phil's going to do the next bit. Thanks for bringing that illustration up. That's quite helpful. Thank you.
Development of a more structured workforce plan is to be developed by the head of HR and pensions. That's you, Graham. Who else would be involved in developing this plan? Will any involvement from Resources Over and Scrutiny Committee be as members? And what is the timeline for this development plan?
We should have a workforce plan which sets out quite clearly how we match our most useful and our best assets, i.e. our people, to the needs of the service. That's my view. We've had something, I guess, to this point, which has been called a people plan, which, I choose my words carefully here, I think there are certain limitations with that. And I don't think it takes us into the real realm of workforce planning to the extent it needs to. We have increasing aspirations of the community we serve. We have reducing staff numbers in terms of the services we need to provide. And we need to be a little bit smarter in terms of how we use our staff resources and how we perhaps redeploy them or deploy them in a more general sense to get the services done and to follow the priorities of the council. So I think we have a little bit of work, and some of this work is about understanding the workforce. So it is understanding the trends of how the numbers are changing within the workforce. It may be that the head count is coming down, but the full-time equivalent numbers aren't, i.e. maybe we've got more part-time jobs. It's also looking at things like grant-funded posts and understanding the dynamic of the workforce in an age, a qualification sense, but also in a skills sense, in terms of whether we've got people with skills in certain areas we're not fully utilising, and whether they can be taken out of non-priority areas and redeployed into other areas. So we need to understand the workforce in a little bit more detail. We need to ensure that we've got the appropriate training and support and development opportunities for those people. So be it managers managing, or whether it's simply enabling improved leadership in some respects, or whether it's more fundamental than that, that we've got people who could make life a lot easier through the use of IT, and we're not enabling it. That might be as simple as for office-based staff, would voice recognition software be of use, or something of that nature? Some would say yes, others would say no, I'm not interested in that at all. But the point being is we do need to think more holistically in terms of how we use the resources that we've got. So I do think we need a slightly more structured plan around this area than we've had so far. I work on the basis that we've got a corporate plan that you agree and drives our priorities. What we use to support that is the major assets that we've got. So you spend a huge amount of time around the budget, rightly so, because that's one of our biggest resources, financial. Do we spend the same amount of time around people part of the organisation? Well, I would challenge and perhaps say no, we don't. We spent quite a lot of time looking at accommodation, buildings, IT, some of those facilitators, but I still come back to the point to say that I'm not sure we've devoted as much time to the people part of the business as perhaps we may need to do to build a more adaptive and resilient workforce through what is undoubtedly going to be periods of change over the next 3, 4, 5 years. So, I've got issues around that. Councillor Seaborn, you asked very specifically who else would be involved. This is not it's not a private party, if I can put it that way. This is an issue that needs input and perspective from all levels, as far as I'm concerned, and it needs both strategic and operational input. And I do not see any way it could be produced, taken forward, developed and implemented without appropriate input from elected members to shape and influence that. Timelines, I suppose the trite answer to that would be yesterday, but the more serious and considered answer would be to say that we really need something during the course of this year. We've perhaps been given a little bit of time around things like reorganisation, but I think that just gives us a little bit more breathing space to try and get our act together and do something a bit more structured and sensible in this area.
Yeah, I mean, I very much agree with what you've said, because, I mean, one of the things, and you probably heard me discussing it just as you were coming in, one of the concerns I have, and I think workforce planning is an extremely important issue, because it isn't just about retirements and redundancies, it's also about people that leave, and there's a dual impact on that, because some people have the expectation that there will therefore be a promotion that they don't get. And then there is the other issue in that the person who goes into that role may not have the necessary experience, although they are an extremely experienced senior officer. They do not necessarily have the experience in the department that they're now running, and are very reliant then on the officers who are already there, who are already a bit narky because they didn't get the promotions they were expecting. So I think workforce planning is a very important area that this council now needs to move into, because we've noticed a very serious number of high-profile people either retiring or just leaving for other jobs that has left us open, I think, to issues.
Very interesting point about our workforce, which doesn't come out in this audit, because as a sustainability member, the whole business about well-being and lifetime thing, the new act that's come in, we actually have to take account of that. And I did mention earlier about the training and retirees. They're all part of the same conundrum. We don't audit for that at all. If you do an environmental and sustainability audit, you would put the whole lot more in there, wouldn't you? And that is really interesting you brought that one up, because some other authorities, I'm thinking Swansea and that, do actually audit for that, don't they? They are starting to audit, let's put it that way. We don't maybe do that, we just go down the financial audit line. Maybe that's something that will come into this.
I think, Chair, what I would say to that is that I think there probably is a little bit of catching up for us to do here. We do need to deal with the operational aspects of HR, but I do think we need to be a little more strategic than we have been to this point. A couple of other comments I would say is that we do have the issue that people leave, and that we're asking people to step up to the next level, and we do need to make sure they're appropriately supported and equipped to do that job and carry it through. Some of that you do by learning on the job and experience, but other things we can support. I mean, for example, through the ILM this year, we're supporting another sort of dozen managers doing some leadership and management development, and we're getting grant funded for that, so it's not costing us, but it's an effective use of resources. So things like that we have to use. But one of the things that Councillor Karen mentioned, which I was struck by, and it's a real issue, is culture. And cultural issues whereby people feel, oh, I'm next in line, perhaps I should get the job regardless, or why has that person got the job, or whatever. But it's deeper than that, because we have instances that as soon as people hit the age of 55, they expect to be allowed to have voluntary redundancy and given a lump sum to go. And that is not necessarily helpful. And part of the service issues and the financial issues we have to think about, you have to manage that expectation. And people don't always like it when we're saying, well, look, I'm awfully sorry. In a service sense, we cannot afford to lose that post, because a VR or a CR means that the post has gone. You know, the job is redundant by definition. But we do have a cultural issue with that around expectations, and that can prove quite challenging.
Right, should we finish this one? Oh, did you want? If you quick one, because we've got quite a lot of tight time here.
Thanks, Chair. We had Martin in for you, Graham, who is the trade union rep, the GMB, and he made a couple of good points. We were talking about resourcing and the impact in the structural workforce plan. We've alluded on some of this already in terms of we've got a little bit of time between, well, we expect when we're going to be told we're going to have these mergers between different authorities. But he said that he gave us some really positive feedback about how well Profile had been working and opportunities for their members to seek redeployment by capitalising on the skills that they had. So a part of the question really is that, well, it's more asking for commentary around about the support that we have in place for those members who are being redeployed, and two, he mentioned that there were opportunities arising, and we've seen it with Trading Standards Department as an example, where there's been a greater degree of collaboration and shared services with a neighbouring authority, and it's whether, as part of the workforce planning, something like Profile could be rolled out to neighbouring authorities, and more use could be made of shared resources between the authorities. I know it's going off the topic of early retirement, but it was something that was fed back by Martin.
There's a lot in that one question. Profile has been very helpful to us. We've developed that with Welsh Government grant support, and we've developed that. And what it enables us to do is wherever we've got somebody at risk of redundancy, then we can look at the skill set they have, we can look at their preferred ways of working, and we can see if there are other types of role where we can move them into that role if there is an appropriate vacancy. Good illustration this year in particular has been in social care and housing, where they've done quite a lot of work to cross-match, and it's a term we use as sort of bumped redundancies, where posts have had to go, but there have been people who want to go elsewhere in the organisation. So the logic is that if you're going to make some people here compulsory redundant, and you've got some volunteers over here, is there a cross-match to be able to say, let the VRs go, but rather than make these people compulsory, if they've got the appropriate skills and ways of working, can we redeploy them across and keep the knowledge in the organisation? And social care and housing have been particularly good at that this year, this budget cycle. We've used Profile for that sort of arrangement, and what we have done is to be able to avoid some compulsory redundancies through the redeployment mechanisms. One of the difficulties we're having is that because there's an overall tightening, there are fewer vacancies to redeploy people to. So, levels of turnover within the organisation are reducing, and we're not getting large numbers to be able to say, well, there's vacancies, can we redeploy them into that role? Because we're not creating jobs to the same extent, and if anything, we're losing posts. In terms of the collaborative arrangements, then it's helped there to an extent, but of course, one of the issues around Profile is I don't want to get too technical here, but what we've attempted to do is, if you think of the Profile scheme, which looks at behaviours and preferred ways of working, and you think of single status job evaluation over here, what we've tried to do is to map those together in a sensible way, so that ways of working for people and preferred choices link in with sort of levels around the evaluation in terms of work methodology and decision making and those sorts of things. So what we've done is to link profile in to our other competency type mechanisms under job evaluation. Now, we did originally look at how we could roll profile out on a wider basis to other authorities. But of course they all have different job evaluation processes with different grading levels and different competencies required in terms of different grading. So it becomes more difficult to try and translate it across into other councils. Because if everybody had followed exactly the same job evaluation scheme, you might have been able to do it. It is possible, but it's technically it would be a bit messy to try and do. But I think it is the sort of thing we would need to get into if we were being encouraged to collaborate or told that we were merging with other councils. We would need to get into that very area to look more holistically across an expanded workforce.
I can see that this is a minefield because you then start talking about OCNs and professional competences, going miles and miles on that one. Can we leave that one, if we may? Thank you for that. That's a whole new area we could go on some other time, isn't it? That does sound quite involved. Thank you for that. Yes. Can we go on to theme 2, which Jess was going to explore for us? By the way, I was mentioning the Wellbeing and Future Generations Bill. I've had in mind whatever they do on that one earlier. Thank you, Jess.
It's really linked in with what we've been talking about. How does our approach to early retirement and voluntary redundancy compare to the other Welsh authorities? And for example, we've got at the back, Torfaen has no general scheme for requesting voluntary exit. Is that common across authorities? And also, do we look at what happens, not just in Wales, but further afield?
I'll deal with the easy one first, and that is that we've not particularly looked into England to see what is happening there. We've tended to use Wales as a more appropriate peer group, subject to the same financial restrictions and that. So we tend to stay within Wales. We do take the temperature through the HR directors, sort of my counterparts in other councils. So we have regular contact and take the temperature through that sort of networking in terms of what others are doing in this sort of area. And it's quite surprising that everybody seems to do it slightly differently. So you will get some councils who will say for 2 or 3 years they've had virtually no redundancies. And then all of a sudden they come along and say we've got 300. And it's all happened in 1 year. And then others, and I would put us in this latter category, where it's more modest, 20 or 30 year by year. So it's perhaps a more even spread over a period, which I would argue is less disruptive to the organisational core. Do we all have the same policies on payments? No, we don't. So that if you go across the 22 councils, do they all pay exactly the same amount of money for a person who is 55 years of age with 30 years of service on exactly the same amount of money? Then no, they don't. Because there is a statutory calculation around redundancy, but you can enhance that. And we know that we pay less out than some, but there are some councils out there who adopt a tighter, more rigid line to what they pay out than others. And I know before I come into this role, I think those discussions have been had with trade unions in recent years about possibly looking at some of those levels of payment around redundancy. But they've not been changed in recent years. So there are differing practices across the councils in Wales.
Thank you, Chairman. Moving on to the second question, really, on this theme 2, recommendation 2. To what extent will the Council be involved in the development of common principles? Now, this document went to audit first, and there was a little criticism of it in audit that it was very general. This document, I mean now, saying that it was very generic, wasn't particularly helpful, as it was too generic, was the comment that was made in audit. But it seems to me that in some respects we are moving down an area where councils will have to come closer together around almost everything, pay scales. I mean, if local government reorganisations coming about, there's going to have to be a serious look at everything, and this strikes me as one of the areas where they've already started having a serious look. So, to what extent do you think this council will be involved in the development of common principles?
By definition, I mean, the report was almost fairly generic, but I think what it had the benefit of doing is provide a flag to sort of say, look, these are some of the areas that you now need to look at in a little more detail. I mean, it should be said that the Minister at the Assembly has now announced that a staff commission will be established. That will be on a non-statutory basis to begin with. That will be in place by autumn of this year, and the advert has come out only this week to invite applications for that staff commission. The staff commission, part of the role will be around some of this commonality and common principles. So, I mean, I think that work will be done. How we can feed into that is not yet clear. You know, whether they will ask to speak to professional groups such as the HR directors, whether they will ask to speak to individual councils about their existing practices, whether they will do comparisons across, well, you know, if one council pays statutory redundancy and another council pays statutory redundancy and a bit, you know, how do we rationalise those sorts of things? So I think there will, whatever we say or do, be a move towards more consistency and standardisation. It is not clear to me how much opportunity we will have at the moment to input into that.
More questions on this one? Okay, shall we move over the page? Page 3, another few sections here. Who wants to kick off on that one? Thank you, Mary.
My apologies. I'll give the questions. I might not be able to stay for all the answers, though I have to leave at 3:15 to go to another sort of crucial meeting.
Thank you.
Recommendation 3 in the report, of course, is about the role of governance and scrutiny and challenge when it comes to, you know, not only higher value packages, but early departure schemes, etc., and the suggestion that internal audit be used as well. So I've got a few questions here for you. We have no detailed report to scrutiny at the moment to specifically monitor early departures. Do you think there should be? Is that you think the best route, the best governance route? And what reporting processes are currently in place for higher value packages? And perhaps you have some best value or some good practice examples that we could adopt from other authorities. Lastly, internal audit do not currently have this as a key risk. And have we had a discussion with internal audit about managing early departures? And could you share some of those discussion outcomes with us? And it's suggested that the annual report would be a retrospective report. But should we also not have continuing and enhanced scrutiny of the scheme as a whole before implementing that? I can give you a repeat of something.
Could I also add that when we had a discussion with Welsh Audit yesterday on the phone, that was one thing that we had quite a long discussion with on them.
So first of all, should there be a detailed report to scrutiny? Then what reporting processes do we have, and benchmarking good practice of other authorities? And then internal audit, not seeming to consider it to be a key risk? And then the nature of the annual report and the timeline for that?
The bit that I was on about was the bit about the ongoing report. Was the bit that we had a conversation with them about. Sorry. You've got a whole lot in there. That's good. Oh, sorry.
I think the important thing for me is that as elected members you are comfortable with what is reported to you, and you feel you are getting the appropriate information you need. I suppose the first question in that context then is, do you want information before decisions are taken or after? If it's before, then there is a crossover then into what might be deemed head of service territory. But having said that, I totally recognise that to be told about things perhaps a year on from when it may have happened, if it's an April to March sort of cycle, as it were, is not a great deal of help in terms of currency. So there's an issue there in terms of how timely the information needs to be. How do we monitor it? Well, at officer level, we obviously monitor it within the context of the budget, because you get regular reports in terms of financial monitoring and where there are variances throughout the year and what's happening there, so that in fact the officer monitoring around this area feeds into that process. In that it will deal with numbers who have gone, what savings have been made, where there may have been departures which have cost us some money. Those are all factored in to that sort of process. So there is monitoring. The question, I guess, is how visible that monitoring is, and you may feel that it needs to be a little bit more higher visibility than it is at the present time. What you'll have seen from the report presented to you today is that we can produce the information and get at the information, which I would point out that what was apparent from the Audit Commission report is perhaps not all councils were able to do that. But we can produce the information across the different ages, categories, types of departures, costs associated with those. We do have the right tools and the mechanisms to be able to extract that, should you wish to see more regular reporting. The issue around higher value departures is quite an interesting one, because it relates to a number of things. Obviously it relates to, or one element is the seniority of the post. A second element is to do with the length of service that individual will have had with the council. But it can also get into the more sensitive areas of whether there's sickness issues, disciplinary issues, grievances, or those capability issues, and whether there are employment law issues being brought to bear in the departure of an individual. Now, in some of those, they have to be dealt with very sensitively, and of course, wider exposure at too early a stage can compromise the outcome of the case. So some of those have to be dealt with quite carefully. The question really is, what sort of is the currency surrounding that? How soon, perhaps after the event, would you wish to tune into that? Because I think what it's about is perhaps not any one individual case, but it's about the processes that we have in place. Have we got the right processes to properly manage this, to support the workforce through times of change? And if you're not comfortable with the processes, then we perhaps need to evolve and change some of those. In terms of internal audit involvement, then I think internal audit would probably say that they recognise the way this is so closely linked into the budget processes, where they are very comfortable. There are issues, though, of a staffing nature where audit have to be involved, and so they will be aware of those sorts of issues. They have not done the sort of Wales Audit Office approach to say, well, how many people have gone, what categories of people have gone, what cost has it been? They might turn around and say, Wales Audit Office have just done our job. But there's perhaps another layer of detail, a more granular level of detail there applicable for Justice, where audit may find it useful to have a look at. It would need to be fairly clear, though, as to what they were attempting to do, because they can't comment on individual cases. I think that would be inappropriate. What they can comment on, though, is the procedure that we have to safeguard the financial interests of the Council, and that might be a more appropriate way of doing it. The timeline question is one where I would say that the timeline could be within reason or almost anything. On this occasion, it happens to have been a study done over 3 3/4 years. We could do something on an annual basis, and part of the reason for suggesting an annual basis is that it is linked to the budget process. It has a sort of time, an annual cycle where we invite expressions of interest, and at the end of the financial year we can tie it in the numbers with the actual costs more clearly on a financial year basis. So that was part of the reason why perhaps I was suggesting a financial year basis reporting after the financial year end. But again, that's something that you may choose to have differing views on.
We had a little training session about how to use ModGov to give comments on executive members' decision, and that would be a useful tool, kind of bridging that gap when we have that 5-day period in which we can express concerns or even eventually call in a decision, etc. Do you think that will help with governance and scrutiny in a more individualistic way?
If we're looking at individual cases, then that is that's dealing with matters of the workforce, which my understanding is that's head of paid service responsibility. Where it would come to the executive member is where there is a requirement to pay some money out over and above what someone is statutorily entitled to, because that would require funding from reserves, for example. Again, there's confidentiality around those because it could outline some individual circumstances. So I can understand how that would give an avenue to enable members to comment more widely, but there are issues of confidentiality around that, and not all of them go through the executive member process. You know, if there's no additional payment over what somebody's statutorily entitled to, it's just met out of normal revenue budgets.
Glyn, you want to say?
To a degree, really. I think this takes us nicely forward in recommendation 4.
We decided that. We looked at that already.
Yeah, where we're in this issue now of enhanced payments. So, what circumstances do you feel warrant enhanced payments, and what are the reporting processes? I mean, obviously it will eventually hit .gov, but not .gov, but it isn't at the moment.
This is quite I suppose a tricky and a sensitive area, really. The normal practice is we don't do settlement agreements. You wouldn't choose to have them. We have policies and processes which mean that if there are matters where there are staffing issues where those issues need to be managed, there are processes to support that. So we have capability procedures, we have disciplinary processes, we have grievance policy. So those govern the normal circumstances. There will, however, sometimes be instances, and as I've already referred, I think the number is very, very small within here, where there's a particular cocktail or combination of circumstances and events. And it may be something along the lines of a disciplinary, on top of which a grievance coming the other way is then layered, and then further complications on top of that. Those sorts of instances can then lead to either people voluntarily walking away from the organisation and claiming unfair dismissal, or they could have their contract terminated, and equally they could claim unfair dismissal. And then you get into the arena of attempted reconciliation or mediation through ACAS, and then through into employment tribunal territory, each of which is lengthy, costly, and resource hungry. And I think of particular concern, draining not just on officers of the council, but particularly for those officers who feel in some way either aggrieved or who have felt they've had to walk away, because that is a lonely place if they're choosing to make that. In those sorts of instances, it may be that it is a more time-appropriate use of resource to expedite matters by coming to some sort of legal agreement with that individual, to say, look, this disciplinary will not go forward, but equally, does that grievance need to go forward if you are comfortable to walk away from the organisation and enable yourself to move on. So it's that cocktail of events which can on occasion say, well, do we want to end up in an employment tribunal with considerable potential cost, or are there ways that we can work with the individual and with the individual parties who may be affected to come to some sort of more amicable arrangement, which might involve a payment out, but that payment could indeed be far less than might be the case if swords are drawn and it becomes very confrontational through legal proceedings.
Is that an inevitable cost? Because obviously we've seen those costs, those type of payments. Are they inevitable costs for a large employer like us?
Inevitable is an interesting word. I mean, you'd like to think it isn't inevitable, but I've not yet come across a sizable organisation that's been able to avoid it totally. The sheer nature of the complexity of what we do, the nature of the workforce and different people and having to work together in close circumstances and arrangements inevitably can create tensions and frictions, and you can do an awful lot to mitigate that, but it's very difficult to take it away totally from a working environment as big as this.
Well, obviously the amount there is quite a lot really when you look at it, but imagine, I don't know what the comparison is across the South East Wales authorities, but it's probably not the thing we're privy to.
Well, what I can tell you is last year, one of our neighbouring authorities paid $238,000 out for an unfair dismissal claim on one case. That maybe puts it into context of what we've paid out.
Anybody else want on this particular theme? I'm going to I'm going to ask the theme on the quality, if I may, which is equality impact. How much weight should be given to the equality impact? Should we be concentrating on the job rather than the person? I'll do little 3 bits of this because I think you can answer these. So, social impact of early departures, and then the end bit of this is risk assessment form will only assess the risk of an individual department. Will this also be carried through on the whole scheme basis to consider overall impact rather than just an individual impact? When added together, each individual departure, will this may have more of an impact overall? Shall I say that again, or are you okay with that?
No, I mean, I think that takes us into an interesting area because, as I've already said, for the first time this year, we've tried to introduce this risk assessment for chief officers when they're looking at posts where there could be somebody going. We haven't, for want of a better word, audited yet the extent to which those chief officers have used that and applied these principles. But I quite like the idea of trying to get some sort of feedback and bring them all together to create a wider perspective on what's happening in terms of those pressures in service areas. At the moment, they would be isolated risk assessments depending on where those jobs at risk were. So, you know, whether bringing all that together would give us slightly more informed or wider messages for applicability across the organisation is quite an interesting concept, but we've not got into that yet. Yes, yeah.
Not on their side.
And the equality impact, that was something we did discuss in the pre quite a bit. What's your take on that?
I don't know. I can add a lot to what I've already said, really. I mean, it all depends what angle in respect of equality you're wanting to come into this from. You know, the workforce we have at the moment is 75% female. So what we haven't particularly done is to look at, say, early departures or those under voluntary redundancy or those under compulsory redundancy and looked at the balance between, you know, is it more male or more female? Common sense would suggest it's more likely to be a majority of female, but that's simply based on the profile of the wider workforce, not through any analysis that we've done. It's just not one of those things we've thought to look into yet.
One of the conversations was had about retention of people with skills, letting one lot go, keeping people that got skills and letting other people go. There was an equality issue around that lot as well, wasn't there?
It is quite difficult. I mean, I've got 1 or 2 people in mind who I know are desperate to go. But they have quite unique skills for the organisation. And we really cannot allow them to go, because to replace their sort of role, we'd probably need to bring somebody in, train them for 5 years, and then say they can go, by which time they'd probably be, well, I think they might even be 65 by then. But that's the sort of dilemma, and that's just one little example, but that does happen in other areas. And I guess it is an equality issue that are people being treated the same? Well, what I would say is that when we go out for a voluntary redundancy trawl, we are absolutely clear. There's no guarantees. There's nothing in what we're doing that says, yes, if you want to go, you will be allowed to go. It's very much about, are you interested? Because there may be opportunities, and we provide the figures to them. Then quite a few come back and say, well, I've seen the figures, I'm not interested anymore. Some say, yes, I'm still interested. And then it's a question of trying to tie that up with the service requirements of the department. But it's stressed all the way through. There's no guarantees here. Just because you say you are interested, there is no right, there is no entitlement. You know, we've got to see how we can best manage the budget and manage the service requirements.
you've got a problem because you've got certain persons, without referring to any particular jobs or anything, some people that have got the knowledge, haven't they, of certain things around here are quite unique, haven't they? Without alluding to any particular task, we as councillors know this.
Yes, but that is the nature of what we do. We're a very, very diverse organisation, and we cover so many different types of skills and areas and professions. So I guess that's going to be inevitable.
If I can now, moving on to the recommendation 6. And the question here is how accurate is the calculation for payback periods? But I think what I'd rather know is, I mean, I can't believe for 1 minute when you set this system up, you didn't think it was accurate. What are we doing? What are we doing to make sure it's accurate? I.e., are we going back in a year's time and looking and seeing a department that's done something that's meant they haven't actually made the savings from a redundancy that they would have normally expected?
There's two parts to that. The first part is about the accuracy of the initial assessment. And what we do here is, I choose my words carefully here. Am I still an accountant? What we have done since I've moved into HR is to foster even closer relations between finance colleagues and HR colleagues and bring processes together. So what we're doing is within the voluntary redundancy arrangements, Dave Lilly and I have put in place a very clear process which will map out how much will it cost for that person to go. Is there a pension strain cost? Is there a redundancy cost? How much are they in the budget? Which is, let's say, if you like, the HR side coming through there. Dave is then looking at the budget side of things to say, how much do we have as budget provision for this individual? And we compare those closely and look at the payback periods. So the payback periods we know with a high degree of precision. The second part is then saying, right, that's what the department says they were going to do. Let's look at it in a year's time, and has it actually happened? And the first point about that is we know the person will have gone, and we know how much that person has received as they go out the door, and how much we've had to pay into the pension fund for any pension strain cost. So we'll have done all that side of things, and then again what finance or accountancy colleagues will be doing is doing the budget monitoring to come back in and challenge the departments and the service areas to say, well, you said you were going to do this, either you have achieved that or you've not quite achieved it, why haven't you, and what other arrangements are you going to put in place? So I would like to think that there's a reasonably robust process to try and get to that information. I suppose I'm more concerned with the first part of the process, and then Dave is more concerned with the back end of the process about ensuring those savings are translated through to ensure services stay on budget and within budget. So I hope that answers.
Any more for this? Theme number 7. Who wants that one? Don't all shout at once. Want to go, Phil? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Dave Lilly will swear by the financial accounting system and his ledger. And for me, the comparable to that is the IVOR system. It's all about, it isn't just a payroll system, it doesn't just pay people. It's an integrated HR and payroll system. And so it's a powerful tool in terms of analysing, interrogating and producing information around the workforce. And that includes things like starters, leavers, pay grades, profiles, almost any way you slice it or dice it, it can produce that sort of stuff. What we've had with previous systems is they've never been very good in terms of the ability to interrogate and produce management information. IVOR is much more advanced in terms of being able to do that, and we're making, I think we're starting to take advantage of that now. So when we got this request from Wales Audit Office, which said, can you do this, that and the other, yes, we were able to do it all. And we submitted it. They came back, they asked one or two minor questions, but they were very happy with the data integrity that they got. So that's helpful. We are, and I can't take any credit for this, but I mean, my guys who work on this system were shortlisted last year for an award with Midland, who are the software provider, because they felt we had implemented IVOR in a way which is the way it should be done, to map into an organisation and to get the real functionality out of it. Now, my guys didn't say, we want to put in a submission. Midland told them, look, you've done this well, you need to submit and put in for this. So we're working quite closely with them. They're using us as a reference site for IVOR. And I have to say, we do give them quite a hard time in terms of developing the product. So that I've got one or two colleagues who are particularly hard on them, and rightly so. You know, we pay a lot of money for this system, so we want to make sure it's doing the business for us. But we have had other organisations, both local authority, police and private sector, come in to see how we've implemented the system and how we now use it. So we are up to date with the current version of the product. We're pushing them all the time for developments. You will know that we have introduced this concept of manager self-service and employee self-service, so that they can look at quite a lot of information. You can go in, you can book annual leave, you can look at your pay slips, and those sorts of things. And we're looking to do further development with the system around things like training needs analysis, around recruitment processes. So we are continually looking to try and push the boundaries and develop it further. It is a system that three of our neighbouring colleagues within Gwent are on, so there's only Monmouthshire who have a different system. We're on the same system as the other three, and what we are told, this is not us, but what we're told by Midland is that we have developed it to a further extent than any of the others. So that's quite encouraging, and I should also say Gwent Police are on there. So what does make for interesting reading is, well, what could happen if there was collaboration going forward? You know, we may all have structured it slightly differently, but have we all got some sort of common platform that we could settle on? I think the answer to that is yes. Those of us with long memories will recall we did try and do this a number of years ago. Try and get 10 councils in South Wales to do a shared HR and payroll operation, and it got so far, but then too many other councils dropped out of the process, and it made it non-viable. But who knows, that debate could come round full circle before too much longer.
Thank you, Graham.
Any more questions on that? I was going to ask you, so what do you do, is all your personnel stuff on that as well?
It depends what you mean by personnel stuff. There's we have a separate legacy system which has an awful lot of the paper scanned. So where there have perhaps been, there's been a grievance case or something of that nature, all of that will be scanned and retained electronically. I am looking at the moment at a sort of workforce monitoring arrangement through IVOR, so that if, for example, we get a grievance or a complaint or a disciplinary, then whether I'm there, if I'm the officer dealing with it, whether I'm there or not, or 2 or 3 of my people are away, anyone can go in and say, where is this process up to, even if they're not dealing with the case. So there's a sort of a work management type arrangement. Longer term, we could look to move quite a lot of the data across onto IVOR. One of the balances there is about size and storage. So there's an awful lot that's being developed in there, and there is more that we can do.
Just follow up a bit on the very last question, because you've mentioned the potential to use voluntary redundancy as a tool to support the budget is diminishing. What impact do you think this will have? And the question is, what alternative methods can be used for making savings? Well, the obvious one is just redundancy, isn't it? Not non-voluntary. Is there anything else that sort of is there in the background?
The composition, of the workforce is changing a little bit. I mean, we're probably finding that the workforce is maturing generally, because although we are losing people, 55 or 50 plus 50, we're not bringing lots of people at the bottom end. So I guess the profile of the workforce is changing. But one of the interesting things is that, there's a table within the report in Appendix 3. And the statistic I did just want to pull out was that over that 3 and 3¾ years, about 146 compulsory redundancies. And bear in mind, some of these are schools related as well. 2/3 of that was over 55s. 2/3 of the compulsories. But perhaps the more interesting statistic is the 197 voluntaries, where only about 40%, as many as 40% were under the age of 55. So what it means is there's quite a lot of people under the age of 55 not entitled to pension, who are then saying, well, I've had enough of working in this environment. I haven't got a pension, but I'm prepared to take a voluntary redundancy and move on elsewhere. And that figure is perhaps quite surprising. Of the VRs, 40% of those are going without any access to pension. And they're simply saying, I'm choosing to go. I think that's quite a high figure, and that's perhaps a reflection on what's happening in the public sector. I think there will be an inevitable drift, if I can describe it that way, that we may have to have more compulsories. It is worth saying that in the tail end of 2014, there were not many more than that. There were probably only another half dozen or so, if that. And as part of this budget round, there have not been many. We're in single figures, really. But that's as a direct result of immediate budget proposals. What it doesn't allow for is the fact that throughout the financial year, departments may come forward with proposals for change in organisational structures, and that in itself could lead to some further. You asked about are there other, I suppose, ideas or things that could be done to minimise the compulsory redundancies. And this really is difficult territory, I have to say. There's no easy solutions. We've been trying to manage it as best we can for 3 or 4 years now. And the end of financial austerity is not yet in sight. So it becomes increasingly difficult. And we've not had some of the headlines that other councils have had because of the way we've tried to manage through this. But it's going to become increasingly difficult. And if we don't get the volunteers, I mean, that's a double-edged sword. You know, if you get the volunteers, that's better than compulsory, but you're losing potentially experience. If you don't get the volunteers, then you're into more compulsory. And it isn't just the people leaving the organisation. If they live in the borough and their family are affected, then it has those wider effects. And, you know, we can't ignore those things.
You're then on to a question of something that's quite interesting. People, obviously, early retirements, etc. You're hitting morale of the organisation when we get to a stage. What's your reflection on that? I'm sorry to ask you that question, but it is obviously this stuff does point to this stuff.
I think... Yeah, I mean, and I'd make 2 or 3 observations. One is that I'm always struck by the staff survey results, which I think show the workforce as remarkably resilient. They're still proud to say that they work for Torvine, and they still feel encouraged that they're doing a good job. So I take that as a real positive. Equally, within that same survey, we've asked questions about, are you concerned about things like management of change and reorganisation? And you'll find almost 75% of the workforce are saying, yes, they are concerned about it. So they are tricky issues to deal with. And again, we come back to the point that there's no easy answers. And so the only other flag I was going to put in there was that I do sense increasing tensions across the workforce, whether that's in the format of the nature of grievances, and by that I mean what might appear to some to be very trivial issues can now get blown up, and that is perhaps a wider symptom linked into levels of sickness, stress, and those sorts of things, that we need to just be mindful. And that's exactly why we need to look at support mechanisms for some of the things like sickness, stress, support, and those sorts of things, to try and reduce the tension levels a little bit, take a little bit of the heat out of some of those circumstances where we can. I won't pretend it's easy.
Anybody else on that one? Shall we go on to the last area? Who wants that one? Anybody got any more questions they want to ask?
All I was going to say, Chair, is that the last comments that Graham made, they actually came out with, the union. So, so that, the union is, well aware of what, you just said and about the workforce.
I thank you very much indeed for this, Graham, and the element of synergy between what you've said and what the union said. Sensitivity. You're smiling. I mean, it's brilliant that you both said that.
I was going to say, Chair, we do regularly talk to the union, but I haven't talked to them specifically about this issue.
I sit on the education committee where you all sit round there, and that's fascinating. Yeah. They do, and it's robust, but commonality more often than not is what happens. And I've seen that in action. Anything you'd like to add before you go, sir?
I think the only thing I would add is that I recognise that the Audit Committee may have felt the report was a little too generic, but I actually think it's been an extremely helpful report in enabling us to open up a wider debate about some of these issues, which, as you might gather, are particularly dear to my heart. So thank you for the opportunity.
I think you've used it to tease out the issues for Torvine, haven't you?
I wouldn't want to give the impression that that was the only comment the Welsh audit that the audit committee had concerning this, but it was one of the first comments that were made, and they did dig a little deeper after that.
Thank you very much for coming, and if nobody else has got a last word to say, we'll let you go. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Any sort of big points that we've got?
Yep, thank you,
Just have
Chair.
some big points.
Well, as
Big
Graham
points.
mentioned, it was referred to the Resources Committee from the Audit Committee. We were asked to review and scrutinise to what extent suitable arrangements are in place within the Council to address the recommendations made. So, as you've gone through, the recommendations were set out in the action plan. Are you happy that the actions proposed address all of the recommendations made, or do you want to go through them individually and see if there's anything you'd like to add to those?
Finn's got some insight.
I was very interested in hearing what Graham had to say about the impact assessment forms. We've just started doing them. We haven't really, I don't, Graham said we haven't really looked at them, looked at the results. So I think that's one of the things we need to look at.
Yeah, I have that down for the actions against recommendation 5, so to look at overall impact of early departures, not just on individual levels. So I've got that one to
Would you like to
against recommendation 5.
Would you like to go through these one at a time very briefly? Okay. So we go through them one at a time and just do a recommendation on 1 to 7. All right. That seems nice and logical.
So for recommendation 1, there were some discussions about a more structured workforce plan. That's obviously on the radar to be done this year, with input from both strategic and operational at all levels. How would you as a committee like this involvement in this, or reported back?
Oxygen, mother.
Ask for maybe sort of an ongoing report, because obviously as it, it's going across the years, so.
Yeah, so more of an update report rather than dedicated.
And then we can go from there.
There was also the point about that Councillor Karen raised and Graham answered about managing cultural expectations.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you feel there's any work that needs specifically addressing there.
I think there's a bit I did mention, but I don't think you got it. There's actually a huge piece in the Wellbeing and Future Generations Bill. But come and hit him in the head. It's probably very new.
There was a bit, I'll repeat, there was a bit about the talk following on from the Strategic Development Plan and Impact Assessment forms. Graham had said that those forms were used for the first time this year, but the follow-up with the chief officers hadn't been done yet, and that needed to be done. And there was a bit on looking at the notes there, that was talking about the linkage on the profile scheme to competency-based evaluations as forming part of the structured workforce plan.
I don't know whether we can bring that thing about impact assessment forms and how they're working in, really, because I think there is this issue that there is no detailed report scrutiny specifically monitoring early departures. And whilst I can see why there isn't, I think there should be some sort of reporting to this issue of early departures is having a considerable impact on working day-to-day working in the council, and something around this should be going to some committee, some scrutiny.
It was mentioned in the Welsh audit report. That's why it was brought in. You need a reporting mechanism somewhere along the line.
If I could come in there, Chair, when Martin was with us, and we questioned him on paragraph 5.5, isn't there a little bit of a recommendation from his answer there about the simple request for voluntary exit and a form for it, isn't there?
Well, yeah, and I don't think this annual report that they're talking about here at the end of every year is particularly helpful. You're looking at what you did last year, and you're not even looking at it straight after it happened. You probably don't get that report until about September, looking at the 13-14 or 14,
The conversation we had with the Welsh audit people was that they wanted something to go ahead, anticipate. Yeah, they wanted a forward-looking planning mechanism. They weren't happy that it's kind of 18 months a year, and because our report mechanism is always out.
So yeah, I mean, I think it would be useful to go to the executive member and say, look, we think, it is a recommendation. We think that there should be a reporting mechanism somewhere, if not to this committee, to definitely to somewhere.
Okay.
Yep.
You okay with that?
With regards to recommendation 2, I didn't pick up any particular additions to that section there.
Common principles was discussed. You happy with that? We can't make that, can we, really? Okay. Recommendation 3.
Recommendation 3, the only notes I made on that were about discussions with our internal audit, that there was the idea that the only thing that they could specifically look at was the procedure that has been put in place to safeguard the budget. So I don't know if that's something you want to know. Time to leave that one.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't pick up anything for recommendation 4. Recommendation 5, we've already said about the overall impact rather than just individual impacts. And I didn't pick up any additions for recommendation 6 or 7, unless you have anything to add to those.
So any general
recommendations?
Yeah, sorry.
Picked up from Martin from GMB. To do more work on the flexibility with workforces across departments and also collaboratively with other authorities. Also work with senior officers, more focusing on the area of education, because there seems to have been some issues there. Those are the 2 from me.
Anybody, any others they want to throw in there, Glenn? You look like you're dying to...
Well, no, just a bit of a wild card, really, in the sense that knowing that local government reorganisation is coming in some form or other, some suggestions about collaboration within...
The one that we passed over, haven't we, then? That which is, where is it?
Yeah, but that's more about seeing what they're doing. This is more like when... I suppose it comes around that one where we said, what involvement will we have in the process? And Graham said, well, at this stage we didn't know. But I mean, I think it wouldn't do us any harm to push this up to another level where maybe HR directors are coming together, finance managers are coming together, and sort of push this forward somewhere to say, well, look, this is happening. We need, as local authorities, to have an input. as little Torvine's saying something, it isn't going to go terribly far, but if we can sort of push it up a level to, I don't know, meetings of chief executives from the local area, you know, from regions, where we can perhaps have an impact to draw together what we're doing and explain it, if you like, to Welsh Government so that when they come up with a system, it doesn't undermine part of where we're trying to go.
Good practice as done by local. Yeah, something like that. You up with it, Hugh?
I think that's an eminently sensible suggestion that's been made by the councillor there, Glyn. I was trying to think about this in a broader context and think, well, was this the WAO coming out and thinking too many local authorities in Wales have been utilising these kind of schemes to manage the reductions in their workforce, and it's evident that there has been significant take-up of that by the Welsh authorities, and I can see where they're coming from in terms of trying to see whether we've derived good value for money from that, and obviously the inherent risks that are associated with the loss of all these this expertise and experienced people, particularly people that are likely to go, will be post-55, the majority, because they are eligible, therefore, to take up their pension entitlements. And as Graham alluded to earlier, that these people quite often have got 30-plus years' worth of service. So there's a number of factors there, really, but I think he's already alluded to the fact that the numbers are likely to go down as we go forward. One, because we've kind of tapped into the seam. I can't think of a way of describing it better, but those that are eligible to do so and those who want it have already upped and gone and done it. So that number is likely to come down. I mean, we might see a significant increase again in another couple of years' time when we're all first forced into mergers with a different authority. That might be a different story. But it's been food for thought. I mean, in terms of recommendations, it's difficult to add a lot more to it. But I think it has been an interesting debate that's been held, and some good ideas have been sort of brought forward to the table. But I think it is something that does need to be pushed up and taken. If it's just left as it is, no one's really going to pursue it. It'll be, it's been scrutinised and that's it. And the recommendation is to go forward to the executive. And I think I would agree with what Glenn said, that perhaps it should be looked at a lot higher level, at CEO level, finance director level, and some work done on it at that level and fed back to Wales.
Jessica?
Yeah, if I just make a quick comment for the recommendations when we're talking about the structural work plan. Because I was quite shocked at the end, you're saying that on the VRs that nearly half of them were under 55. So can they especially look at the risks involved with that? Because obviously the idea is, they're training up and coming through as the over 55s leave. But if we end up in a situation where people midway are leaving, then we're not getting the replacements. So just with the cultural aspect, I suppose. But yeah, just to have a look at the risks involved.
Just on that point, Chair, that's just been made. I think it's a very good point. Is maybe some work needs to be done then to as part of I don't know if you have an exit questionnaire or something, but some work needs to be done to try and evaluate why though we have got that higher percentage of people under 55 that are utilising this option. Is it because they're dissatisfied? Is it because of stressful conditions at work? What's the rationale behind that percentage take-up?
You see, I was trying to get to. He was very, very honest about that. I thought it was quite good in a way, but that stress question. I mean, obviously we do get people leaving. You get people in and out of the organisation, but we've got a lot less people in now. A lot is where we're filling gaps now. We're filling gaps. It's important. And obviously morale is a major thing. We've got a lot of things at the moment. We've got people, we don't know where we're going with the replanning, and that is obviously going to be a big problem.
Yeah, you're right, Chair. I mean, in terms of staff turnover, Graham said, well, we're not getting the vacancies now for the new intakes, and this is why they're looking at the apprenticeships as a method of passing on some of those sort of skills. But with the leavers, I mean, it does make you wonder if this is a historical report and the economy has been that bad. It's like, well, where are these people going? What jobs are they going on to? Or is it an indicator, perhaps, that things are improving and there are opportunities for them now further afield? I know you're going to get some natural migration, but that percentage struck me as being quite high, that percentage figure.
Well, yeah, and if you look at those figures, you see the 50 to 54s are the lower ones, presumably hanging on until they get to be 55, whereas you've got between 40 and 49, 18.66. That's almost the same size as the ones who are going at 55 to 59, which is 19.5. I mean, it's less than 1%. So it is a frightening figure.
The obvious thing is they've got another 10 years in the private sector if they want to go down there.
Okay, so I'll formulate those and email them all to you to approve before they get sent.
Thank you. We've still got a bit to do here, by the way, before you run out the door. Number 7 on your agenda, if you have a look, the discussion of item B to take to the next meeting.
Thank you. If you remember, we were due to have energy management at this meeting, but due to certain circumstances that had to be postponed. Energy management. So if it's okay, committee approved, we'll take that to the June meeting.
That would be a very interesting topic. It's one of my specialities. Okay. Summary of executive decisions. That's on your paper if you have a look. I did actually. We're going to take what to the June meeting? Energy management, with your favourite subjects.
It will be discussed but at a later date.
Yes.
It was due to come to this cycle.
So, page 87 to 106. I'm sure you've all read that. Executives, do you want to go through it or assume that you've read it? Do you want to have a look through? Pardon? No, we'd like to note it. Who wants to say they've noted it? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed.
Some exempt decisions as well here.
Go on. Oh, we've got some exempts.